For those of you who don't know me, I'm Christina Hildebrand. I am the founder and president of A Voice for Choice Advocacy. We educate and advocate for informed choice and transparency of what goes into your body, be it food, air, water, pharmaceuticals. We want you to know what's in it, and you get to choose whether you put that in your body. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about the legislation that's been introduced in California for 2022 and what the different bills are. There are good bills and there are bad bills. What the different bills are and where they're at in the process and what you can do about it. And then I will take questions after that. So what do we have? We have the 2022 California bills, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So A Voice for Choice Advocacy, just some background on A Voice for Choice Advocacy. As I mentioned, our mission, but over the past 7 years, we've established ourselves as the leading legislative organization lobbying in the California Capitol for your health rights. We've taken a position on vaccine legislation since 2015, including SB 277, which removed the personal belief exemption, SB 276, and SB 714, which made the medical exemption stricter for K through 12 school requirements. We were able to defeat SB 18, which was the Children's Bill of Rights, and we got significant amendments to AB 992, which would allow parents to opt out of vaccines during home visits without discrimination. We have also worked with Assemblymember Christina Garcia to author AB 1989, the Menstrual Product Right to Know Act, which was enacted into law in 2020, which required all menstrual products to be labeled, their ingredients to be labeled, and that will go into effect the beginning of next year. We currently have 2 lobbyists and myself actively lobbying legislators in the Capitol, and we also just hired a legislative director. So we are boosting up our efforts, and we need to because we have a lot going on this year. What I'm going to share today is partly knowing how to create a trusted professional relationship with your legislators. That's not always easy, and it's hard to know where to start. And so I'm going to go through the bills that are out there this year that have been introduced, and I'm going to go through both good bills and bad bills. And I'm going to do that because when you go and meet with your legislator, it's really important to have some positive things and not just go in opposition to a bunch of bad bills. So one of the things I just wanted to give a little bit of background to some of the things I just mentioned. In order to get information, legislative information, you go to leginfo.legislature.ca.gov. And at that site, you can find all the bill information. You can search by bill number, you can search by legislator, you can search by keyword. And when you go in there, you can see what is happening with each of the bills. The 3 tabs that I like to look at, or that I usually look at, is the text, is the initial one, which shows you the text of the current bill. So if it's been amended, it'll have all the different amendments that have been amended on that bill. The history, which shows you the history and where it's at the moment. So many of these bills, and I'll go through this on each individual bill, but many of these bills have been referred to committees. And so it will say that. It will say if there's a date that it's been referred to the committee and will be heard in the committee, it'll say that on there. And then the other piece that's important is the bill analysis. So before every committee hearing, the committee will write an analysis that will go through the pros and the cons, the support and the opposition for that bill, as well as previous legislation. And you can look that up for tens of years going back, all the different legislation that's out there. So that's a really important website that we use a lot. It's what we use to show you, all the information that we put out in our emails and things like that. One of the things that I did want to mention is that what A Voice for Choice Advocacy has learned over the past 7 years is that outright opposing bills that are authored by unwavering legislators and that are supported by powerful organizations such as the California Medical Association isn't the most effective strategy. So in 2015, we outright opposed SB 277. We did not ask for any amendments, and we got to the place where that bill just flew through. In 2019, we were one of the few organizations that was asking for amendments, and people realized after that we should have asked for amendments early on. It is much easier to amend a bill than it is to outright oppose a bill and kill the bill, unless you have a large lobbying organization on your side. So there are bills in the past that we have actually left up to those organizations to oppose, and they have done a good job of killing the bill. And we also believe at A Voice for Choice Advocacy, if there are organizations that have stronger lobbying power than us, those are bills, and I'll get into those, but those are bills that we don't necessarily take as active a role on because there are other larger organizations taking that role. So in order to oppose a bill, in order to flat out kill a bill, you need to have either, as I mentioned, a strong lobby or the votes. So in order for a bill to pass, they have to have 50% plus one vote. In order to do that, you have to have the legislators either abstaining from the bill or voting no on the bill. And so that's, in order to get in, for example, on a floor vote in the assembly, you would have to have 40 votes in your favor, saying no to the bill or abstaining on the bill. They need to, the support side needs to have 41 votes. And so it is very hard to get those votes. So as I mentioned, amending a bill is easier. And what you'll see is that for many of the bills that I go through, we take a stance, A Voice for Choice Advocacy takes a stance, while we would absolutely love to kill all these bills, don't get me wrong, we are strongly opposed to these bills. We do recognize that getting amendments on a bill is more likely than just completely killing a bill. So in order to amend a bill, either legislators or organizations have to request those amendments, and they're usually done in the committee. So during the committee analysis, so when a bill goes to a certain committee to be heard, it's usually during that period that amendments get made. So I wanted to go through just an overview here of the good bills and the bad bills, and then I'm going to go into specifically each bill and drill down on them. So in 2022, we have 6 good bills and 6 bad bills. The 6 bad bills were put forward by the Legislative Vaccine Work Group. That group is comprised of 7 legislators, and basically each of them pretty much have 1 bill each. The bad bills that we have and that we are actively opposing are SB 866, which would allow 12-year-olds and above to consent to receive vaccines without parental consent. SB 871, which is a COVID vaccine mandate in order to attend in-person daycare through 12th grade public or private school. A COVID AB 1993, which is a COVID vaccine mandate for all private and public employees. The modernization of California's Immunization Registry, which is AB 1797. And the disciplining of doctors for spreading COVID and vaccine misinformation, which is AB 2098. So those are the 6 bad bills. As I mentioned, I am going to go through them in detail. And then the good bills that we have, and as I mentioned, it's really important to have good bills that you support in the legislature. You don't want to go into the legislature or into your legislator's office and just say, these are all the bad bills. You need to do something. You need to oppose, bad, bad, bad. You want to have something that you go in and you say, oh, I really like this bill. Would you please make sure you support this bill, just to show that you have a place that you are positive about something. If one of these are your legislature's bills, all the better, go in and support them on that. This is a variety of bills. They fall into our mission statement, but they don't necessarily, there are more bills that you may be in favor of that are not these 6 bills, but these 6 fall into our mission statement. And there are a variety of bills. So, there is most likely one here or more than one here that you can go in and say you're supporting. So the first one is AB 1809, which is a Nursing Facility Resident Informed Consent Protection Act. There are 2 pesticide type bills. One of them is removing neonicotinoids from non-agricultural products. One is a product safety, removing PFAS from textiles. And then we have AB 1785, which is the California Parents' Bill of Rights Act, and AB 2060, which is an act relating to the Medical Board of California. And then the last one is Vocational Nursing Direction of Naturopathic Doctor, SB 994. As I said, I'm going to go through each of those in detail and share with you what the good side of them, what they specifically say. So getting into these bills, I'm going to go through the bad ones first. I'm going to go through what they actually mean, where they are at, when we expect them to be heard in committee, and what you can sort of what the talking points are of them. So starting with SB 866, minor consent to vaccination. So SB 866 would remove parental consent and authorize a minor 12 years of age or older to consent to vaccines that meet specified federal agency criteria. The bill would authorize a vaccine provider as defined to administer a vaccine pursuant to the bill, but would not authorize the vaccine provider to provide any service that is otherwise outside of the vaccine provider's scope of practice. So what that really means, and one thing to note before I get into what it really means, one thing to note is that, you know, people are up in arms about this, but California already allows, and this was passed in 2012, it was AB 499, and it basically already allowed 12-year-old minors to consent to vaccines for sexually transmitted diseases such as HPV and hepatitis B. So there is precedent set that children 12 years and up can consent to vaccination. The other states that are also allow this are Rhode Island and South Carolina, permit 16-year-old minors to consent to vaccines. Oregon, it's 15 and above. Alabama, it's 14 and above. And Washington, D.C. is 11 and above. So there is precedent set. One thing I should take a step back and say is I'm often asked, do you really think these bills are going to pass? My answer is I do think all of these bills have a really good shot at passing, but what is written in them is likely to change. So for example, this bill and Senator Pan's bill that requires the COVID vaccine for schools, I do think there will be an SB 866 and an SB 871 on the governor's desk at some point this year, probably, you know, towards September. What those bills include is another story. And so that's where, you know, I say to people, you know, you can be completely opposed to these bills, but it is likely that there is going to be a bill at the end of it. And so we may as well try and amend it to be better and to be watered down than to completely kill it. It's unlikely that it will die. So the status of this one, this bill has been referred to the Senate Judiciary Committee, and it'll be heard either March 22nd or 29th. There's a possibility that when I have these dates that they will go into April, but those are the first dates that they could be heard. The key piece here is when you see what committee they've been referred to, you want to look at who's on that committee legislature-wise, and if your legislature is part of that committee, it is really important to get in front of them before it's heard in that committee. The committee hearings are very much PR and media. So when you see people testifying at those hearings, the legislatures have pretty much already made up their opinion of how they're going to vote. Legislatures are very rarely swayed by what happens in the testimony that day. What it is really is those meetings prior to the hearings that have happened with their constituents, with organizations, with lobbyists, that really make the difference. And so it's really important to have those meetings now before it actually gets heard in whatever committee it's heard in. You can find what members are on the committees by searching Senate Judiciary Committee, for example, for this one, California. If you search for that, their page will come up, and at the bottom of the page, it says who the members are. So our response to this bill is that we strongly oppose it unless amended. Our amendments are to change the age to a minor 16 years or older. Some people say to me, well, what's the difference between 16 years and 18 years or 12 years? If we were to say 18 years, we're trying to get rid of the bill. 16-year-olds at this point basically can go and get vaccinations anyway if they really wanted to, without their parents' consent or with one parent's consent. So we're at a point where you know that is happening anyway. And we want to ensure all efforts are made to contact parents prior to vaccination. We want to require the vaccine provider to obtain complete medical history to conduct physical examination and evaluation of the child. So that is what's required when a physician is doing a medical exemption. And so we want them to do it the same. People say, well, I don't want them doing a physical exam of my child without me there. I agree, but if they're going to be doing this, they really should understand the history of the child and get all the medical history prior to giving that vaccination. We want them to require a non-parental consenting minor to be vaccinated in a physician's office. So they can't be vaccinated at a school clinic, a mass vaccination site, a pharmacy, a reproductive care clinic, or other location. We really want them to be in that physician's office rather than at a place where they can be pulled into it, for example, a school. We want to ensure that they can't be bribed, bullied, or coerced into getting the vaccination. That includes things like offering them pizza or boba or lottery tickets or scholarships or whatever else. And then we want to require a parent to be notified immediately after the vaccination. So if there is a adverse event, that they are aware that that's what it's from. And then allow minors to also decline vaccination without parental input. So while this bill says, it allows children to get the vaccination without their parents' consent, we also want to do the flip side of that, which is for children to be able to decline it if their parents want them to get the vaccination and they don't want to get it, for them to be able to decline it. And then the last piece is to not allow any other service other than vaccination and the treatment of reactions directly after vaccination. So the bill does have in there that a provider can give any other service that they are allowed to do. So for example, if they're in a pediatric office, that could be a whole number of things that provider can do in that session without telling the parents. So that's SB 866. As I said, we are opposing it. We are suggesting these amendments because we do feel that this bill will make it through and continue along its way. And so our perspective is it's better to get all of these criteria put in there rather than just trying to oppose it and have it go through as it is currently written. The next one I'm going to go through is SB 871, COVID vaccine mandate for daycare through 12th grade. It requires for anyone to be in person in any of those grades, public or private, to get the COVID vaccine. It does not specify whether that means 2 shots of the COVID vaccine, a booster, 2 boosters, annual boosters, or anything else. It is unlikely that wording will be put into the bill. It may be, but for all other vaccines, that is up to CDPH, the California Department of Public Health. And so it is unlikely that it will go into the bill. And so it's not clear what that actually means if that vaccine mandate is added. It also removes the personal belief exemption from future CDPH added vaccines. So right now, the statute says that if any vaccine other than the 10 diseases that are on the list, if any other disease is added by CDPH, that there has to be a personal belief exemption. That was added into SB 277 in 2015. It was very purposefully added in there because the legislature wanted to ensure that if a vaccine is added permanently without any parent opt-out, that it went through the democratic process of the legislature and legislation. And so the bill currently wants to take that out, which would mean that the legislature no longer has jurisdiction over that. CDPH, a regulatory body, would be the one that would be adding vaccines and could add any vaccine without a way for parents to opt out of that. And our perspective is it has to stay within the legislature. It has to go through that democratic process, go through committees, have public comment, have the public be allowed to make their voices heard. Now, when CDPH adds it, there is a 30-day public comment period, but that 30-day public comment period really doesn't fulfill the same place as the legislative process. It also removes the hepatitis B vaccine from the 7th grade exemption. So currently, the way the statute is written is very confusing. It says that you don't have to have the hepatitis B for 7th grade entry. When we had a personal belief exemption, that made sense. It basically meant that you don't have to check, schools don't have to check at 7th grade for the hepatitis B vaccine. If you didn't have it at 7th grade, it didn't really matter if you had it beyond that because there wasn't a requirement for it because you could have a personal belief exemption. With the way that SB 276 and SB 277 were written, it really doesn't make sense and it's confusing because you don't have to have it for 7th grade, but you do have to have it for 1st through 6th grade and then 8th through 12th grade. So it is removing that. We don't have a problem with the removal of that statement because it makes things easier to understand. So our key issues with this bill is that it's premature. We haven't seen what COVID vaccines really can do. They aren't very effective for children. We don't know what COVID will look like. If you look at COVID over the last 2 years, it has changed weekly, monthly, daily, how virulent it is, who's what the vaccine effectiveness is, those types of things. And so our perspective is it's just too soon. If we're going to mandate this vaccine, we need to wait and make sure that the vaccine actually is effective, which we've seen with Omicron. It doesn't stop transmission. And our biggest question on this, and the question that you should be asking your legislator, is what is the purpose of this bill? If the purpose of this bill is to stop transmission, COVID vaccines don't do that in schools or anywhere. But if that's the purpose, it doesn't do it. If the purpose is to prevent symptoms in children, that also isn't necessary because children don't have as severe symptoms. Very few children die from this. Very few children have really serious side effects from COVID. And if the last one, if it's to prevent transmission or to help teachers or the community have less COVID risk, that also doesn't apply because the COVID vaccines don't work against the Omicron virus. And so the Omicron variant. And so it really does mean that this bill doesn't do anything, really. It doesn't stop transmission. It doesn't stop prevention in the community. If they want to stop people who are high risk or teachers from getting the vaccine, then those teachers and the high risk people should get the vaccine, not the children. So that is, our big question on this bill is really, what is the purpose of this bill? So you're aware it has been referred to 2 committees. It was actually referred to 3 committees, but they removed one of the committees because of COVID. Basically, they're not having as many committee hearings this year as they would normally pre-COVID. And so it is only going to the Senate Health and Education committees, which is good. It's being double referred, which we were hoping for a triple referral, but it is going to those 2 committees. It is likely to be heard in the Senate Health Committee, either March 16th, 23rd, or 30th. If I had to put my money on it, I put my money on the 23rd, just from the inside scoop that we're hearing. I will also say that the Senate Health Committee is Senator Pan's committee. He chairs that committee. It is very likely that it will fly through that committee. So our bigger issue is with the Education Committee. Again, you need to look up the Senate Health and Senate Education committees and look at who's on them and check whether your legislator is on those committees. Even if your legislator isn't on the committees, you still want to set up meetings with your legislator because they are going to vote on these bills when they come to the floor. So as I mentioned, a Voice for Choice advocacy response on this bill is to strongly oppose unless amended. Again, we want this bill not to go anywhere. We want it to die, but we really don't see Senator Pan. It's his last year in office, and we don't, this is his legacy. We don't see this bill, SB 871, not being on the governor's desk at some point this year. But what the bill says is a whole different story. And so our amendments that we're requesting is to continue to allow a personal belief exemption for CDPH to add vaccines. So remove that. Not remove that criteria. We want a religious and conscious belief exemption for the COVID-19 vaccine. And we also want natural immunity to count in lieu of vaccination. Okay. The next bill is AB 1993, Employment COVID Vaccines. This is Buffy Wicks's bill, Assemblymember Buffy Wicks's bill. And it would require both public and private employers to require all employees or independent contractors to show proof of vaccination against COVID-19 unless the CDC determines that the COVID-19 vaccinations are no longer necessary for the health and safety of individuals. It would impute financial penalties on employers who fail to comply. There is a medical, disability, and religious exemption allowed in this bill. It has not been referred yet. It will be referred this coming week. So our response to it is that we're strongly opposed unless amended. We feel it's arbitrary and unnecessary. Basically, what is it trying to impose? It's trying to impose vaccines. Again, the same points apply. It's not going to stop transmission. The vaccines currently are not going to stop transmission. We are moving away in California from COVID protocols. And so it really doesn't make sense. It does create an undue burden on employers because they are now becoming the medical police and requiring this. And it also means that about 25% of Californians, 20 to 25% of Californians have not been vaccinated. And so that 25%, while they may get religious exemptions or medical exemptions, they would be, they would lose those employees if they don't apply for those exemptions. It does discriminate on race and income. What we have seen is that those of minority ethnicity are less likely to be vaccinated because of various reasons. And also the lower income people are less likely to be vaccinated. And that is not because they don't have access to the vaccine. At this point, everybody has access to the vaccine. It's because they don't want to be vaccinated. Again, the real question is, what is the purpose of this bill? It's not to, it can't stop transmission. It does lower the symptoms, but if you're worried about lowering the symptoms, I'm going to put that in quotes, but that's the piece is that the vaccine will decrease the symptoms that you have. If that's the case, then it's up to the individual to get vaccinated. It's not really, shouldn't be really a criteria of employment. A Voice for Choice Advocacy is going to suggest amendments on this. We haven't got amendments together yet because this is one of the bills, as I mentioned, where there are other much larger lobbies like the Chamber of Commerce, like some of the employment agencies, unions, those types of things that have a far greater lobbying power and will really take the lead on this bill and opposing this bill. And so we are happy to sort of wait and see to what their amendments or their requests for amendments are and how this bill is going to change. Right now, it is a bill that sort of does a very, very broad requirement. And I do think that will be honed in and become very, very targeted by the end of this bill, if this bill gets anywhere. I honestly think this is one of the ones that may not move all the way through, or if it does, it will be very, very heavily amended. The next bill that we're opposing is AB 1797. This bill does not currently have language in the bill. So we don't know exactly what the language will be. It's part of why we haven't created a formal document opposing it, but we do know from a press conference that Assemblymember Akilah Weber gave that it would basically merge the 3 California immunization tracking systems to create one statewide system, and all vaccinations will be required to be entered in it. So currently, San Joaquin and San Diego have their own immunization registry, and the rest of the state has a different immunization registry. So there are 3 immunization registries. This would bring all 3 of those under the same umbrella. And it would, right now, doctors don't have to input vaccines into the immunization registry. Most pharmacies and large organizations, so like Kaiser and UCSF and those types of large entities, they automatically put the information into the care system. But a private doctor, an individual doctor, has to pay for and get training on the immunization registry system. And many of them don't input vaccinations into the system. This would require them to put that information into the system. The other thing that this does is it allows schools and other entities to have access to all vaccination records rather than just those that are of their student and their patients or particular vaccines required for school. So right now, a school can go in, they can type your name in, and they can say, I want to see Christina Hildebrand's vaccine records, put in my date of birth, and it will spit out whatever vaccine records have been put into the immunization registry, unless I have locked it. If I've locked it, then they can't have access to it. My data is still stored in the immunization registry, but they don't have access to it. For schools, it only downloads the required vaccines for school. So if I got additional vaccines that are in there, it doesn't download them. What this is going to allow is basically for schools and other entities to download large amounts of data. Our concern here is privacy. We're really worried that schools shouldn't have access to this data on a large scale. And they don't, the reason behind it is so that they can understand the pockets that aren't vaccinated, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that really isn't a good reason. They should, schools shouldn't be the vaccine police. And so our concern is that, this database is going to become, sort of a open place for anyone to download the information. Because we have not seen the language of this, we can't really say what's going to happen. Our request is that the data not become available, that it become, that it basically is even more made private than it is already. The other issue that we have with this is that the care database right now is actually a mess. It has more records than there are people in California, partly because nobody's taken out when they die or they move. It also has, for example, if I'm put in there as Christina Hildebrand, and then I'm put in there as Christina Elizabeth Hildebrand, I'm considered two different people. I'm not merged. And so it is a very messy database right now. And so if they are going to do something to it, they really need to spend time cleaning this up. And I'm going to guess that they're not going to do that. The other concern we have is that there is a federal bill that would give funding to states to improve their vaccination registry, that would require the states that take that funding to have the same information and the same setup in their database as other states. And what they're basically creating is that if you're in Utah, for example, and you want to access the California Immunization Registry, that you would be able to do that, or the entities that can access it could do that. And so we're concerned about that as well, the sort of spreading of that data across state lines. As I mentioned, we have not put together a formal document on this because we don't have the language of the bill yet. It can be referred to a committee after March 10th. So we will see where that goes. It's likely to go to the Assembly Health Committee. It may go to Public Safety as well. Okay, the next bill is AB 2098. And this is another one that we are opposing. This is Physicians and Surgeons Misinformation. It's by Assembly Member Lowe. It basically would designate the dissemination or promotion of misinformation or disinformation related to SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 by a physician or surgeon as unprofessional conduct, allowing the medical board to take action against such a physician or surgeon. Our issue with this bill is we agree we don't want misinformation spread. We think there's a lot of misinformation out there, including Senator Pan's comments. So we would be happy for this to pass, but not the way it's written. So right now, the basis in the bill for consideration of disciplinary action is attributable to applicable standard of care. So for something like cancer that's been around for a long, long time, standard of care is set. It's pretty much understood what the standard of care for something like cancer is. It's chemo, radiation, or surgery. However, for COVID, if you look back over the past 2 years, the standard of care changes on I would say, monthly basis. If you look at March 2020, the thing to do was to put everyone on a ventilator. Well, we realized, and the government was paying for ventilators to be made, millions of dollars for them to be made and shipped out to every hospital. We realized soon afterwards that that wasn't the way to treat COVID. We've gone through so many different treatments. There was hydrochloroquine, ivermectin, there's monoclonal antibodies. We then got the vaccine. We then got more pills, Merck and Pfizer antiviral pills. And there is so much in development that we have no idea how to treat COVID or what's going to be the standard of care treatment for COVID. The other thing is that COVID is, changing. So the alpha and beta variants and Delta variant is different from Omicron. And so the treatment is changing as well. So saying that there is a standard of care for COVID, the question is, what is that measured by? Because we don't believe there is a standard of care yet for COVID. And the other piece that it is based on is contemporary scientific consensus. Again, that doesn't exist for COVID. What's consensus today of how to treat COVID is different what's from, in a month's time or a month ago or 2 months ago or 6 months ago. And so it's really concerning to us that these two sets of words are used for what a doctor will be disciplined as. The other piece is this is really targeting those doctors in California that have spoken out against the COVID vaccine. Now, many of those doctors are completely pro-vaccine. They're some of the best doctors in the state. Prior to COVID, they were considered the top in their field, and they still are considered the top in their field. There are people like Vinay Prasad, Jay Bhattacharya, Tracy Hogue, have really come out and stood out against the vaccine, especially for children. And they are the ones that are going to be targeted by this. They are the ones that are going to leave the state. We're going to lose even more good doctors in this state because of this bill. So our statement is that we're opposing. We're opposing because we don't agree with those two statements or those two definitions. And so this one is one that I would recommend if you have doctors that that would be targeted by this bill, is to share this information with them, share this bill with them, and have them write in letters of opposition on it. It's been referred to the Assembly Business and Professions Committee, and it'll be either heard March 22nd, 29th, or April 5th. And then the last one that we're opposing is SB 920, which is the medical board investigations. This would authorize the medical board investigator and a medical consultant at the discretion of the board to inspect the business location and records of a physician or surgeon, including patient and client records, without the patient's consent. So basically what happens right now with the medical board, if the medical board has a accusation, or sorry, if the medical board has a complaint filed against a doctor, it will then go to the patient and it'll say, okay, we want to see your medical records. Please, will you, sign this statement that you'll release your medical records to us. There are some patients that don't want to release their medical records. This is specifically true of doctors that have been witch hunted because they've written medical exemptions. Those parents, those families are very happy with having that medical exemption and the care they've gotten from their doctor. And so they don't want to release their child's records to the medical board because they're against the complaint. What happens then right now is that the medical board has to go to court and subpoena the documents and get those subpoenaed from the doctor's office. And at that point, the doctor has to hand them over. What this would allow is a middle step prior to subpoenaing the records. If you say, nope, I don't want to share my medical records with you, the medical board, they could then say, okay, well, we're going to go into the doctor's office and we are going to look at the records. Not allowed to copy them, not allowed to do anything with them, but they can look at the records. And so they would go in, look at the records, and then say, oh, we know we want to subpoena X, Y, and Z. They're saying that it would save them time because they would be able to go in and determine whether they would be able to, whether they need to go to court and subpoena them. Our issue with this is it is a huge violation of HIPAA. HIPAA is the Privacy Act that says that in order for your doctor to share your medical records, you have to give written consent. And this flies against that completely. And that is our biggest opposition to this bill. It also says that, it allows, so this was a wonderful thing in the LA Times, this bill was heralded as it's going to allow patients to have their say in medical board investigations. So currently, when a complaint is filed to the medical board, it does not get any more information from the patient. The patient may be interviewed, but it is the medical board that takes on the patient's case and is against the doctor. And the patient, it's not like a jury trial where you're a plaintiff and you get to give your side of the story. No, the medical board takes it over and they go with it. And so the patient has very little say in the medical board's the way the medical board puts their case forward. What the LA Times made it sound like was that now that patient was going to have a say in that hearing, what the accusation is, what discipline is going to be given. But realistically, that's absolutely not what the bill says. The bill basically says that the complainant can provide a statement which will be considered after final adjudication. So after they have been disciplined, after they've been told what the disciplinary action is, you can write a letter and it'll be used for the purposes of setting generally applicable policies and standards. So really it does nothing. It doesn't give the patient a say during that hearing time. So those are the two things that we have issue with. We're going to oppose this. If we do ask for amendments, it would be on that final piece of it that basically we would ask that the complainant actually gets a say during the hearing and during the disciplining of that physician. This currently is referred to the Senate Business Professions and Economic Development Committee and the Judiciary Committee. It'll likely be heard on March 21st or 28th in the Business and Professions Committee. So those are all the ones that are negative bills. I'm now going to go on to the positive bills and give you an overview of these, just so that you understand where we're coming from, both from a negative side and a positive side. So the first one is AB 1809, which is Nursing Home Informed Consent Protection Act of 2022. This is by Assemblymember Aguilar-Curry. I will note that Assemblymember Aguilar-Curry is on the vaccine work group, so she is very pro-vaccine, very pro wanting to get those mandates through, but this is a really nice bill that she has. It allows that, or it would add the right of every nursing home resident to receive all information that is material to an individual's decision concerning whether or not to accept or refuse any proposed treatment or procedure. It basically gives informed consent to those nursing home patients. The reason behind this has to do with psychotropic drugs, that there has been an increase of patients in nursing homes being given drugs to basically calm them down, to comatose them, so that the nursing home staff doesn't have to deal with them. And so this is one bill that would allow them to have a say in that. We do, as I said, like this. The one thing that we are not sure of is how this would pertain to those patients with conservators. So many nursing home patients in California have conservators that look after their legal and physical sort of custody. And so what would happen there? It's unsure, if a nursing home resident says no, if they have a conservator, can they override that conservator or not? So that's something that we are looking into and asking. This is a bill that we're supporting, as I mentioned, and it has been referred to the Assembly Health and Judiciary Committees, and it does have a hearing date of March 22nd at 1:30 on Tuesday. Second bill that we're supporting is AB 2146, which bans neonicotinoids. Neonicotinoids are pesticides that contain all these different things. Basically, they would be prohibited in the sale and possession except for use on agricultural plants beginning January 2023. This really helps bees and other pollinators. It means that the water will be cleaner and it will be out of our food supply by banning these 5 neonicotinoids pesticides from most non-agricultural settings. We would like it to include agricultural settings, but we know that the reason why Assemblymember Bauer-Khan did not include that is that there is a huge agricultural lobby that would be against it. And so this is a good first step. It's not the ultimate step that we would like to see, but it is a good first step. As I mentioned, we are supporting this bill, and it has been referred to the Assembly Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials Committee, and it'll be likely heard either March 23rd or March 30th. AB 1817 removes PFAS from textiles. PFAS are the things that are stain resistant chemicals. They also, this year, there was a PFAS bill that removed them from or doesn't allow them in takeout food containers anymore. And this bill would remove them from the distribution, selling, or offering for sale any textile articles that contain PFAS, and requires the manufacturer to use a less toxic alternative when replacing the regulated PFAS in textile articles to comply with these provisions. There are thousands of PFAS chemicals used in manufacturing to make things water and stain resistant. PFAS are called forever chemicals because they break down very slowly over time, and scientific studies have shown that exposure to some PFAS in the environment may be linked to harmful health effects in humans and animals. Again, we're supporting this. It's been referred also to the Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials Committee and is likely to be heard March 30th, or 20th, 23rd, or 30th. The next one is, and I should say, all of the bills that we've talked about up until now have been put forward by Democrat legislatures. That is really important because the Democrat legislatures, they have a supermajority in California. It is likely that those bills will actually be heard in committee and will move forward in committee. The Republican bills have less of a chance of actually making it through just because they are a super minority, and their bills often get stuck in committees or are never heard in committees, just the way it happens in California. Is it right? No, it's not right, but it's the way our legislature is made up and what it allows. So this bill is put forward by Assemblymember Davies. She is a Republican. AB 1785, California Parents Bill of Rights Act. This basically codifies a lot of what's already in statute, but it also would require a charter school, school district, and county office of education to provide parents and guardians with opportunities to participate in schools to improve parent-teacher cooperation, as well as post information for parents or guardians on its website regarding a variety of topics. Basically, we believe that parents have the right to know what their children are learning and have the ability to have opportunities to participate in children's educational experience. We are supporting this. It has been referred to the Assembly Education and Judiciary Committees, and we expect it to be heard either March 23rd or April 6th in the Assembly Education Committee. AB 2060 is a medical board bill by Assemblymember Quirk. It basically increases the number of public members of the California Medical Board from 7 to 8 and reduces the number of physicians from 8 to 7. It gives, the California Medical Board is there to protect consumers. I go to most every medical board meeting. And the doctors on that board are very much doctors that are on the side of the CMA, on the side of the California Medical Association. Those doctors are supposed to the medical board is supposed to be there to protect consumers. And what we find is that when you have doctors basically regulating their own profession, it doesn't work out so well for the consumers. And so this would give the tipping point of the majority to public members versus doctors versus physicians and surgeons that they are actually overseeing. So we are supporting this. It has been referred to the Assembly Business and Professions Committee, and it'll either be heard March 22nd, 29th, or April 5th. The last one that I'm going to go through that we are supporting is SB 994, which is a vocational nursing for naturopathic doctors. It is by Senator Jones, and he is also a Republican. This would allow naturopathic doctors to employ licensed vocational nurses while practicing within their existing scope of practice. Right now, there is a limited support staff with medical training in the offices of naturopathic doctors because they aren't allowed to be hired. And so this would give additional patient support and would allow providers to work allow them to hire these licensed vocational nurses to give more support in the setting. We are supporting this. It has been referred to the Senate Business Professions and Economic Development Committee and will likely be heard either March 21st or 28th. The reason why I wanted to go through all of these is I wanted to give you an idea of what is included in each of the bills, what our position is, and when these committee hearings are. So the committee hearings are going to start probably next week, but most likely the week after. And once they start happening, it is going to be a flurry of legislation that is going through committees, and there is going to be a lot going on. You're going to get a lot of requests to do certain things, but the key piece is in this week, in the next 2 weeks, we do have some breathing room, but we need people to take action. As I mentioned, those committee hearings are really more for PR and media than actually changing the legislators' minds in those committee hearings. It's what happens before that that really makes a difference. And so I'm going to go through just quickly action steps, and then I'm going to move on to answering questions. So what can you do right now, today, tomorrow, is these 6 or 7 things. So first thing, if you have not already, please, please, please make an appointment to meet both your state senator and your assembly member or their staff. It is okay to meet with their staff. Their staff are the ones that are taking input for all of these bills and then brief the assembly members or the senators on those bills. The key thing to remember is that there were over 3,000 bills introduced this year. No legislator reads all 3,000 of those bills. It is up to their staffers, which they divvy up and hand over bills to. It is up to those staffers to create a sort of portfolio or an analysis on each of those bills, and then they brief the assembly member or the senator on those bills. So if you can only get a meeting with a staffer, that's okay. Those relationships are just as important. If you can get a meeting with your actual senator and assembly member, all the better. I would try to do both. Most of the time, in order to get a meeting with your senator or assembly member, you're going to do that at a public event, such as a town hall or coffee morning or some school drive or something like that they're having. If you go to one of them, it is easy to approach them and to either talk to them there or to say, I'd really like a meeting with you. Would you have time to talk to me? And it's hard for them to say no at those events. The second thing that you need to do is to submit a letter of opposition or support in the legislative advocacy portal. So this is a portal that is on the legislative website. It's at calegislation.lc.ca.gov advocates. When a bill goes to a committee, that is where you can put in your opposition or your support, and it gets counted in the legislative analysis, which the legislators get that are on that committee. And it says, there are thousands of people that oppose this bill. That's what you need to do. If you don't do that, you don't get counted in the committee or on the floor. And it does make a big difference. The one key thing with when you submit a letter to that portal or you submit content to that portal, your opposition or your support, is that it has to be done at least 7 days prior to the hearing. So when we have bills that are happening next Wednesday, they have to be in by today, tomorrow morning. Now, I don't think we have any bills, or we don't have a lot of bills that are happening next week, but they will happen the week after. So it's really important this week to go through there, and on each of these bills that you oppose or you support, that you put in your letter of opposition or support in there to be counted. If you don't do that, you will not be counted. You do have to set up a username, so they do have your information, but I really highly recommend doing that. The third thing you can do is to attend a Take Action Town Hall. You can find these on, and this is something that Voice for Choice Advocacy and a number of different organizations, PERC, Educate Advocate, CHCA, Children's Health Defense, a number of different organizations got together, and we are doing these town halls. They're happening all over the state. You can find that information on the Freedom Keepers Instagram. They update that information. The Take Action Town Halls are specifically for you to find your like-minded people to go have meetings at your assembly member and senator, and so that you have sort of a support group to go with you if you don't want to do it alone. If you want to do it alone, that's fine. But if you want to have a support group of people in your area that are like-minded, and that you can work out how to go and have those interactions, that's the place to go. The other thing that we ask is that you ask your religious leaders, your faith-based organizations, and school representatives to sign onto the Religious Rights Coalition statement. You can find that at religiousrightscoalition.org. That is specifically asking for a religious exemption or conscious belief exemption to be added to any legislation that includes a vaccine mandate. And we really need a lot of religious leaders and faith-based organizations and school representatives to sign on to that, so that we can go to the legislature and say, look, there is a request for this information, for these exemptions to be added. One other thing is to go to your school board meetings and your Board of Supervisor meetings. Many of the school boards in California are writing resolutions and letters to the legislature saying that they do not want the SB 871 and SB 866. So they are writing against them. So if you can go to your school board meetings and request them to sign a resolution, or to write a letter opposing those, please do that. If you are a small business or a business owner, call your local Chamber of Commerce and ask them to oppose AB 1993, which is the Employer Act that would require employees to get vaccinated. And then if you do nothing else, just talk to other parents and other leaders in your community and stimulate support or opposition to these bills. Get people to understand what is happening in the legislature, because so many people are not awake. You and I may be awake and we know what's going on, but there are so many people that just have no idea that this legislation is moving forward in California. And it's those people that we need to activate and get awake. So I am now going to move on to questions and answers. Okay, I emailed the senators. Should I send them more emails? Does anyone read emails? Great question. So in order of importance and what makes a difference, having a meeting with your senator and your assembly member is what makes the most difference. Having lobbyists and other organizations having lobbyists in the Capitol and having those meetings makes a difference. Those two things, I would say, make the most difference. Sending a letter into the legislative portal, also important, so that your voice gets heard there. Emails and phone calls to your legislatures don't really count, other than being a checkbox. It isn't that you shouldn't do that, but they don't read the emails. They don't read them in detail. They just say, oh, there's another constituent that is opposed to this bill. They don't go through and respond to them. Most of them don't go through and respond to them because they are getting so many emails at a time. So our recommendation is, if you're going to do one or other, make a phone call and try and get a meeting, because that in person, or if it's over Zoom, does make a difference. Okay. When meeting with legislators, shall we address all of the bills or just the next one that they're voting on? Also, is it better to go alone with another? If you double up, you get counted as 1 against 2. So great questions. So meeting with legislators and what bills? You will likely have 15 to 30 minutes. That's all you're going to get. So the key piece there is to go in and talk about the bills that are most relevant to you and that you have the biggest issue with. So our perspective on those is it's SB 871, SB 866, AB 1993. Now, doesn't mean to say that the others aren't important. And we do recommend that you go in with one positive bill as well, so that they see that you're not just coming in and complaining. You need to work out how much information you can get across. You also want to listen to what they're saying. So you want to go in there, and part of probably the first 5 minutes of any meeting, I listen to the legislator or to their staffer and work out, where are they coming from? Where do they stand on this issue? How can I resonate with them? How can they resonate with me on my issues with this bill? Or in our case, our issue, the organization's issue with this bill. So know that you have a limited amount of time, and make sure that you allow for some time where you are not talking, other people are talking. As whether it's better to go alone or with another person, that really depends on the legislator. So some legislators like to lump a whole bunch of people in the same meeting. They'll do it without you even knowing. They'll say, oh yeah, come at 10 o'clock on Tuesday. And you show up at 10 o'clock on Tuesday, and there are 5 other people on the same issue. That is not a good situation to be in, because most of the time when I've seen that happen, the 5 people all have their own talking points and all want to talk, and it becomes, you're basically replicating what you're saying. So it is better if it is a larger group, to make sure that you know who the people are in that group, and you each have your talking points, and you divvy that up beforehand. So I would ask, my recommendation is to go with at least one other person, but make sure that it's somebody that you know, and that you have worked out who's saying what and what talking points you're going to bring up. And so you're not sort of talking over each other or competing with each other. I will say that, I think it is better to have multiple meetings, but at some point, many legislatures will say, you know what, we've already heard the opposition on this bill, and we, don't have time for it. We'll give you a meeting in April or May. We have definitely seen that happen. So you do want to get in sooner than later. I would gauge it. I would ask them, do you want more people? Would you prefer us to have separate meetings? That type of thing. But it really depends on the legislator and their office and what they prefer. Okay. Is SB, I think it's 871, going to be heard tomorrow? PERC put up an urgent email saying opposition letters needs to be submitted by noon tomorrow. What does that mean it will be voted on? So no, absolutely not. SB 871 is not going to be voted on tomorrow. It will be heard in the Health Committee. It could be heard as early as March 16th. As I said before, my bets are on March 23rd. If it is heard on March 16th, then the letters have to be put into that advocacy portal 7 days in advance. And so that's what PERC was trying to say, was to put opposition letters into the portal by noon tomorrow, if it's going to be heard on March 16th. The unfortunate thing is with these hearings is that the bill doesn't have to be assigned to the hearing before 72 hours in advance. So we may not know that bill is going to be heard. Say it's a bill from Wednesday, we may not know before probably Friday, maybe even Monday, that it's going to be heard in that committee on Wednesday. But your opposition letter or your support letter has to be submitted 7 days in advance. So our recommendation is get your opposition letters and your support letters on all of these bills in ASAP. Do it tomorrow. If there's nothing else you do tomorrow, just spend the 10-15 minutes submitting it. The one thing I will say is for the bills that have not been assigned to a committee, so that's AB 1993, the employer bill, and AB 1797, which is the care immunization bill. Those bills have not been assigned to a committee, and so you cannot put in a letter of opposition for those bills yet, because they have to be assigned to a committee in order for you to put in your opposition letter. So those two you're going to have to hold off on, but the rest of them I would get onto that portal and put your letters in there, so you're counted. How can I lock my data in the California Immunization Registry? So if you search online, California Immunization Registry, if you go to that website, it's a CDPH website. I don't have it immediately on hand, but if you go to that website, there is a place on it that says lock my data or something like that. And you have to go through it. It's a form you have to fill out. It's quite detailed, and you have to do it for yourself and each of your, if you're worried about your children, you have to do it for every person in the registry. You can't just say, I'm locking mine and that locks your family, because you and your family are not associated. Okay. I'm a physician whose vaccine exemption charts were obtained illegally through civil court action by the medical board. The parents objected to this, and we spent over $75,000 trying to block this action that violated the Fourth Amendment rights, HIPAA and FERPA. My license is being threatened, and I am accused of being incompetent for using family history of vaccine reactions and autoimmunity as causation to issue vaccine exemptions. We gave peer-reviewed articles and textbooks supporting our efforts to enforce my Hippocratic oath to do no harm. I don't see a question there, but yes, there are many like you. You're not alone. And it is the medical board that is, the medical board has taken a stance on these medical exemptions that really is not fair. People like you were writing medical exemptions based on the statute that said you could use family history. And the medical board has basically put in place disciplinary action saying that it actually is standard of care that needed to be adhered to, even though that was not in the law or the statute. It is very unfair. And yes, you're being witch hunted. And that was the purpose of SB 276, basically. So I am sorry for you, but it is what it is. And that is why this bill by Senator Hurtado is one that we want to actively oppose. Okay, next question. SB 871, my husband and I work full-time and want help more than just call the senator's office and email him, which we've already done. The person who answers our senator's office says he is not commenting on the bill yet because he may not even get to vote on it. It may be changed by the time he is able to vote. What else can we do to oppose this bill, emailing and calling? We don't have time to meet them in person. So, for people who do not have time, my answer is, do you have money? Because if you have money, then you should support organizations. And yes, this is self-fulfilling here, but you should financially support organizations like A Voice for Choice Advocacy and CHCA, who have lobbyists working in the Capitol. Those lobbyists, our legislative director, are the people that are meeting with legislators at least once or twice a day. And so we are doing that work for you. So if you don't have time to do it, I completely understand. My recommendation is give money to those organizations that have lobbyists and that are working hard on your behalf. I would say first and foremost that if you do have time to meet with your legislators, that's from our perspective, A Voice for Choice Advocacy's perspective, that's actually more important than money. But if you don't have the time, then if you have the money, and it doesn't need to be a lot of money, of course, we'll take whatever amount of money. But if you don't have a lot of money, it doesn't have to be a lot of money. Any dollar amount will help us. Lobbyists are not inexpensive. They are very expensive, especially on this issue, because it is such a volatile issue. And so, there's no way we're giving up on our lobbyists, but we do have to pay them. Okay, next question. Obviously, given the legislature's history with vax bills, they're capable of passing all kinds of bills that are nonsensical and unjustified. But given the recent studies showing that COVID vaccine efficacy 5 to 11 drops to 12% after 28 days, how could the Health Committee possibly pass something so absurd? Are they going to mandate boosters every month? It seems laughable at this point, given the new data. I completely agree with you. I do think we will see amendments to that bill, and I wouldn't be surprised if one of the amendments pushes it to a 7th grade requirement rather than a daycare and kindergarten requirement. So that's one of the things that I think we may see. Doesn't make it any better for the 12 to 17-year-olds, especially because those ones are, especially the boys, are the ones that are more likely to get myocarditis or pericarditis. But I do think that we will see amendments to that bill, and I wouldn't be surprised based on that data if we do see that they drop it for 11 and under. But yes, it is ludicrous, is my answer as well. I would like to be able to somehow have a condensed info, what can be done about them, so that I can post on social media to inform and educate people. I am shocked how many people have no idea what is happening regarding these bills. More importantly, people need to know what they can do. Completely agree. We have a double-sided fact sheet. Or not fact sheet. We have a double-sided sheet on which has the bills that we're opposing, the good and the bad bills, so to speak. We are going to also put out this information, but we're also going to put out here's what you can do to take action. My recommendation, and by being on this, you are going to be part of if you're not already on our mailing list, you will be put on our mailing list and we will send it out. We are going to have toolkits for each of the bills that allow people to go and do different things for each of those bills and what we want people to do. So we will be having that. Some of it we already have, but other of it we will be having. So yes, completely agree on that. I would also follow our Instagram, Telegram, and Facebook page because we do post this information on there as well. Okay, next question. With the science changing on all things COVID, I think AB 1993 would be very unpopular if people knew about it, but I don't see much media coverage of it. How can we get to change that? So media coverage is very hard to get, although I have to say that I am very surprised by the articles that are coming out on these vaccine bills. There was one in Cal Matters that was very balanced and basically said, you know, the governor and the state is moving away from vaccine requirements and away from COVID protocols, but the legislators seem to be putting that into place and solidifying it. And so, you know, there needs to be a conversation that's had. I think AB 1993 will, that's the employee one, I think that will get more coverage as organizations come out in opposition, large organization, employer opposition organizations and employee organizations come out against it. But the biggest thing that you can probably do is to reach out to other organizations that are small business organization, chambers of commerce, that type of thing, and ask them to oppose it and get the word out there, make them aware of it. We, as our Voice for Choice Advocacy, we are putting together a list of organizations that we're going to reach out to make them aware of the bill. But really, mainstream media moves on what people are saying and what organizations with political power are saying. And so those are the people that need to be speaking out in order for it to get into the mainstream media. I completely agree with you that there are very few people that are really aware of what's going on. And that's part of our call to action is having people talk to other people, make people aware, because most people are not aware that come January 2023, they will all be required to get the vaccine and possibly, you know, annual boosters, 6 monthly boosters, whatever it is. You know, there are many people in California that have been vaccinated, but when it comes to ongoing boosters, they're not going to take up on it. And in order to, you know, have it as a requirement for their employment, it doesn't work for them. Okay, next question regarding AB 1993. What if you work entirely remotely online as a consultant and get a 1099 as a sole proprietor? Would the person paying you have to ask that you be vaccinated even though you are a sole proprietor and not physically present with others? The answer is yes. So currently, as AB 1993 is written, if you are an independent contractor, if you're an employee, it doesn't matter where you work, doesn't matter when you work, as long as you're in California, I think, but even if you're working from Texas for a California company, I would guess that this applies, you would have to be vaccinated. And so, yes, it applies to everyone. That's why it's ludicrous. I mean, that's part of the reason why it doesn't make any sense. And I think that's where we will see amendments to it. I think there will be things that will be changed in that bill, if it even passes. That, as I said, that's the one bill that I think has a chance of dying before it gets to the end because of that. When will the bills that pass be put on the books? September 2022 or January 2023? So the majority of them will go into effect January 2023, unless there is a date beyond that that is mentioned in the bill. So there are some, for example, I'm trying to think which one. One of the pesticide bills, I think, goes into effect January 2024. Nothing can go into effect before January 2023 unless it's an emergency bill. An emergency bill requires 2/3 of the legislature to vote on it, and it needs to be classified as an emergency bill. It needs 2/3 of the legislature to vote yes on it, and then it goes to the governor. There are very few bills that are put into emergency status, and so we're looking at January 2023 for most of those bills to go live. I will say, I always say this, you have to have a backup plan. You have to have a plan for what happens if your child is required to get vaccinated January 2023. You either need to homeschool them, you need to move out of state, or you need to vaccinate them. Unless they have an IEP. If they have an IEP and special needs, then they're exempt from this. It is going to be impossible to get a medical exemption. So what is your plan come January 2023? Hopefully you don't have to use that plan, but what is your plan if that is the case, if COVID is on that vaccine requirement? What is your plan if your employment requires you to get the vaccine, regardless of whether you work from home, regardless of whether you have had COVID, regardless of any of those things. You have to have a plan. And most people's plan is not to get vaccinated. Most people's plan is to do something else. So if you're moving out of state, if you're getting a new job, if you're, starting your own business, if any of those things apply, you are going to have to take the time to do that. And that usually takes, a good 6 months. So get started now on what your plan B is. Hopefully you'll never have to use it, but you have to have a plan B. Also, AB 1993, who assumes liability for vaccine adverse reactions? So the same question applies to SB 871 with the children. So realistically, you could, if you take the vaccine because you're required to, you could go to court and sue your employer or sue the state. The unfortunate thing is that it is very unlikely that you can show causation. You can show that you got the vaccine and this happened to you, and you now have the adverse reactions. There's also a chance that that bill gets changed, both of those bills get changed, that removes liability from your employer, from the state, from anyone. So right now, there is no liability for any of the vaccines for the manufacturer of the vaccines or the person administering the vaccine. So if you have an adverse reaction, you cannot sue either of those. You can go to the Vaccine Compensation Program or the Preparedness Liability Program, Preparedness Act Liability Program, but you cannot sue the manufacturer or the person administering it. And so the real question becomes what is included in the bill, whether they do take liability. And that was one of the things that the employers' organizations have been saying, that they will not take on is that liability. So it's likely that that will be put into the bill. But even if they can take on the liability, to sue and show causation is really hard to do with a vaccine, because doctors are not willing to say, yep, that happened because of the vaccine. They will go down every other path and try to explain it away every other way. Okay. Will the newly released information about side effects of the vaccine have any impact on any of these bills? So it will only have an impact if the FDA or the CDC or the California Department of Public Health acknowledges it. I don't think that is likely. It may, but I don't think that's likely. So you have to understand that legislatures go with what the government is telling them the truth is. And so they will stick with that. They don't want to go outside of that. We live in California, which is a very progressive state, a very blue state. We don't live in Florida. Florida is completely different on these matters. But in California, we really only are, they very much follow the CDC, the FDA, the CDPH. They don't want to go against the grain, these Democrat legislatures. And so it is unlikely that they will recognize these side effects. How do you think SB 871 and SB 866 will look when they actually pass? I actually have no idea on this. I think there will be amendments for sure. It really depends on which organizations, non-vaccine organizations, but which organizations step up and oppose these bills, and what clout they have in getting amendments. The other piece is the governor, and whether he wants these bills to pass as they are or how he wants them to change. And so I think, and also, we're going into elections. So how much this comes up in elections, and whether it is a issue that they do or don't want to deal with in elections. We saw with AB 1400, which was the Healthcare Act, which would have given universal healthcare to all Californians. We saw that they didn't even want to vote on that because of elections. The legislators did not want to vote because they didn't want to have that on their record going into an election. And so that's something that the elections very much are important here, and what the mindset is of whether this will harm their elections or their election chances. And so I don't actually know what these will look like. I don't think they will look like what we have in front of us right now, but I don't know how much they will change. The tough thing with 871 and 866 is that they are by legislators, Senator Pan and Senator Wiener, who are very confident and cocky, honestly, about their bills, and they don't take amendments easily. Legislators don't provide science nor data to justify a bill. Even in press releases, bill authors don't talk about specific science or data justifying the need for the bills. No basis, no support. How can we get the point across to legislators? You're absolutely right. Science does not hold water. Science from the CDC or from the FDA or from CDPH does hold some water. So if you're going against that grain, then there is reasoning to be had. And I think that you can point out to legislators. But if you go to legislators and show them science that hasn't been approved by any of those things, they'll listen to it often, but they won't necessarily vote with that. They won't necessarily bring it up. Now, I will say there are some legislators that we have gone to with questions that just say, what is the goal of this bill? For 877 and 1993, for those two bills, the real question that I have for legislators is, what is the goal of this bill? Because the goal of this bill is not clear. And if it's to stop transmission, it doesn't do that. If it's to save, community members that are at risk, it doesn't do that. If it is to reduce symptoms of children, it doesn't do that, or of employees, then they should do it themselves, but people should be given that choice. And so that's one of the questions that I would go into, especially on those two bills. But you're right, science doesn't hold water with these legislators unless it's put out there by, the government authorities. For SB 871, will school districts weigh in on this through lobby or through the governor, since they will likely lose students? So I do think that they will. And many school districts have written resolutions against those bills, 871 and 866. We would like to encourage more school districts to do that. So the 871 has two parts to it. It has the science part of it, of why having the vaccine required for school children just doesn't make sense. It also has an educational component. It will go to the education committee. That educational component to it is that there are 25% of teens and 80% of 5 to 11-year-olds that are not vaccinated for COVID today. If those children are not vaccinated and those parents will not get them vaccinated, and I think there's a large majority of them that won't, given the fact that they could be vaccinated right now. If those parents don't, what happens to those children? School districts can't survive with that number of children out of their school. Now, LAUSD, for example, is creating virtual academies, and they are creating independent study schools because they truly will implement the 34,000 students that were not vaccinated at the end of this, when they had their requirement, they will push them into virtual learning. They do not want those children in school. They want to segregate. There are other school districts in other parts of California that will allow those children in school, and they may lose funding. But we are asking school districts, and Educate, Advocate, wonderful organization, has been reaching out to school districts to put their position letters, to send in position letters opposing those two bills. And I would encourage you, if you know your superintendent and they feel that they would lose a significant portion of students, absolutely go to them and ask them to submit letters of opposition and to meet with legislators. Very often they have connections with their local legislators that they can get meetings. Okay, late in 2021, you mentioned some good bills that are no longer on the list, such as repealing SB 277, for example. What happened to those good bills? So those good bills were bills that our Voice for Choice Advocacy, were shopping and we wanted to get authored. Unfortunately, we were not able to find authors for those. I don't think we ever had one repealing SB 277, but we did have one that was requesting a religious and conscious belief exemption be added into that piece of legislation. We are still asking legislatures to make that an amendment of SB 871. We do want a religious and conscious belief exemption in there. It is very hard as an organization to get bills authored, especially on the vaccine issue. We've had many legislators on our side say, yep, we agree with that, but there's no way we're going to bring forward that bill because it would be the end of us in the legislative in the legislature. And so we haven't done that. The other thing is that there are two legislators that left the legislature earlier this year, and they were probably, one of them for sure was probably one of our biggest, the most likely to take forward that religious and conscious belief exemption. And so we no longer have that person that would be willing to rally for us. Next question. What do you advise we do when our assembly people won't meet with us, we have Limon, who is on a committee. I've called and emailed and gotten no response. I got a response from Bennett, our other assembly person, but then was ignored when it came to an actual appointment. So I would recommend that you keep calling. I would also recommend that you go possibly by their district office. So on Fridays, they should be in their district office for sure, but I would almost see if you can go by and just knock on the door and see if they answer the door and just say, I've been trying to get a meeting. The other thing that I would do is look at where they have, what the next events that they have. Most legislators are having about one event a month that is a public event. So whether it's a Zoom call, whether it's a town hall in-person meeting, whether it's a, as I mentioned, school drive or some other kind of drive or clean up the beach event, those are the events that you want to go to. They have to be there if they're having that event. And when you get onto that event, it's connecting with their staff or the actual assembly person and requesting a meeting. Once it's different when you go to somebody like that and say, can I have a meeting with you? I'd really like to talk to you about some concerns I have for our district. And when the legislature says, oh yes, you say, okay, who should I talk to about setting up that meeting? Once you go to that meeting, or once you call that person or email that person, you can then say, oh, Assembly Member Limon said that I could meet with her, that I should set up a meeting with her. And at that point, they'll set up the meeting. And so it's a matter of getting them, finding a way to access them. It's not always easy to get it by a phone. The other thing that I would do is if you can't get them in their district office phone number, try calling their Sacramento office and just saying you're a constituent and you'd like a meeting. And it may be that they put you in touch with one of the staffers in the capital versus in the district. Okay, would an employer who contracts out an employee out of state and allows an employee to work out of state, not a contractor, still be required to enforce this bill? What do you anticipate the exemptions will entail in terms of requirements, and what could it take to get an exemption, medical or religious, to be approved? So I believe the way the bill is currently written, yes, if you are a contractor that lives out of state, but you're doing business for a California employer, that you would be required to follow this. Having said that, because you live in a different state, I think your state takes jurisdiction. So I actually don't know the answer to that because the bill is so vague in this respect. I think it is something that will be clarified. As for religious and medical exemptions, so it's an interesting piece, and we have discussed internally what we want to do about this. So medical exemptions are incredibly hard to get because they usually have to require a contraindication or precaution. In other words, you have to have nearly died from the vaccine, from a previous dose of the vaccine, and even then it's really hard to get a medical exemption. For religious exemptions, we've been doing a lot of religious exemption workshops. I've been doing them. And what we have found is that there are varying authorities in different organizations making the decision to approve or deny religious exemptions, or more specifically, the accommodations associated with them. Now, we have discussed internally whether we want to make that clearer and clarify it in the bill. So what defines a religious exemption, for example, or what accommodations can be applied? The problem with this is if we are asking for that amendment, it is likely that we are not going to be the ones making that wording. And so our concern is that if we ask for an amendment that defines a religious exemption, for example, or defines a medical exemption, that it will be defined in a way that is not correct or not how we would want it. So we're sort of talking about what we want there and whether we want that included in the bill or not. We would like to see a universal approach to religious exemptions that is broad, as it should be, and that the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, would support, which they would, but and the same thing with accommodations. But we're concerned with, if we leave it up to Californians, the California legislature, to define that we're not going to get what we want. So we're discussing that. Okay, next question. I most strenuously oppose AB 1797, the Immunization Registry Weber, which disingenuously characterizes an attempt to create a libertarian state with the title Modernize California's Immunization Registry. We could just call this the papers, please, for now. It seeks to merge three, and then it goes through what I had written. All freedom-loving people need to look down the road at the convergence of technology for tracking all human activity and heavy-handed coercion by state actors. The US patents have been granted for creating and tracking and integrating all medical records, social posting, scoring, political party affiliation, opinion, race, religion, firearms registration, etc. I completely agree with you. I think there are a number of bills here this year that get us closer to that point, but this one specifically, it allows for all of your medical vaccination records to be in one place. And if you just look at China, if you have not looked at what China does with their social credit score, go look at China. It is really scary. I mean, they monitor everything you do. And if you don't do the right thing, your credit score goes down and you can't use public transportation, or you can't buy gas, or you can't go here, or you can't do this, or you can't do that. It is truly, that, and go back and read 1984 and A Brave New World, because we're somewhere in the midst of all of that. But I agree with you. I think there is a piece of this which really gets to getting closer to that vaccine passport, and the vaccine passport is a gateway to a social credit score system, and there absolutely is a want for that from a larger, go to the World Economic Forum. That's another place that defines it all and says what they want to do explicitly on that front. Does 871 invalidate current medical exemptions? So as it's currently written, no. But if you have a medical exemption that says so if you have a medical exemption for all other vaccines, you would not be able to use that medical exemption for the COVID vaccine. The reason behind that is that you would have to get a new medical exemption put into the CARE-ME system for the COVID vaccine. Now, the question becomes, does that invalidate, by having that exemption in the CARE-ME system, does that invalidate your current medical exemption for all other vaccines? Right now, we don't know the answer to that. It's not clear in the bill. It doesn't invalidate them currently, but again, it's something that we're going to have to watch as the bill goes through the legislature as to whether they do that. Do you see any attempt to change homeschool legislation to include vax mandate or exemption status? I don't, and I don't think they can do that. I don't think they will remove homeschools options or independent study options, because there are going to be a huge number of children that are not vaccinated for COVID. And so if they change that, basically you're going to have people leaving the state, you're going to have people doing underground schooling, that type of thing. And I don't think they want to get there. The thing that I see with homeschool, I don't see any bills this year doing that, but I could see in the future them bringing forward bills to tighten homeschooling. So for example, I think there was a bill at some point previously that said that, parents needed to be in some form credentialed as teachers, or have some form of credentialing in order to teach their children. So I can see them cutting, sort of getting into homeschooling in that way. There aren't any bills this year, but what we've seen from the legislature is this a building block process, right? So, with the vaccine legislation, the first piece of legislation came in 2013, the second piece came in 2015, the third piece came in 2019. We've got another piece in 2022. It's all building blocks. And so I wouldn't be surprised in the next 5 years if we see in California legislation that cracks down on homeschooling. Basically, don't take any of this for granted. Don't think just because you homeschool your kids, you're out of the woods in California. Are there any great flyers for us to print and pass out at our rallies and events? There are, yes. So we are putting, as I mentioned, there's a group of us, we call ourselves the Convention on Health Rights. There's a group of organizations that are working together to put together flyers. We have the one for 866 done, and we have the one for 871 nearly done. And so those two I will be sending out on our newsletter in the next couple of days so that people have them. The other one that I would say is our document that has the good and the bad bills. It's a double-sided document you can print out. It says when those or where those bills are being, what committees they're heard in, and then a synopsis of them, which is a great thing to hand out to people so that they understand all the bills that are in contention this year from a good and a bad perspective. We keep talking about mandates. Are mandates legally binding, or will the language change if and when these become laws? I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, but once they become law, so that's legislation is going to make them into laws, and once they become part of the statute, they become legally binding. Why not talk about how dangerous these vaccines are? OpenVAERS is clearly showing this. So one of the things you have to realize is that we live in a very progressive Democrat state, and these legislatures love these vaccines. Every legislature that you go to is going to be Democrat legislature is going to be pro-vaccine. Even the Republican legislatures, most of them have gotten vaccinated. They believe in these vaccines. They believe in the greater good and public health. And so you can go in and show the OpenVAERS data, but ultimately the CDC has said these vaccines are safe and effective. They're coming off of the effectiveness piece. The CDC director now has acknowledged that these vaccines wane very quickly. But from a safety perspective, the CDC has stated that side effects are extremely rare. They do not, VAERS is a self-reporting system. I can come up with all the arguments against it. The legislators, you can show them that information, but they will ultimately say, if this was that big an issue, then the CDC would have done something about it. The FDA would have done something about it. Now, you and I know that those are corrupt organizations, and no, they wouldn't have done it because they're paid by the pharmaceutical industry, and they have deep connections with the pharmaceutical industry, and that's not where they're going. But what you have to realize is what you need is for these legislators to not vote on this bill or vote no, but we just need them to hold off. If they hold off voting on the bill, they abstain from voting on the bill, they are considered a no vote. We need enough legislators to do that. In order for them to do that, you need to come to where they're at. In other words, they are very pro-vaccine. They have taken the vaccine. They've probably gotten boosted as well. For you to go in there and say, you did the wrong thing. There's so many side effects. They're really bad. They're not safe. You're basically telling that person, you're stupid. You didn't do the right thing on these vaccines, and you shouldn't have taken them. They're not going to hear that. They're not going to hear that. And so that's why we don't talk science when we go into these legislative meetings with Democrats. We talk to them where they're at. We talk to them, okay, fine, you want the vaccine, that's great. But for children, it doesn't make sense. For employees, it doesn't make sense. That is much more effective. Remember, your goal is to get them to abstain. Having an argument with your legislator doesn't help our cause, because they're going to become defensive. And they're going to say, you know what, these people are crazy. I can't vote with them. I can't vote against this bill. I can't abstain from this bill. I'm going to vote for this bill just because I can't be seen to be with the crazy people that are talking crazy science and quack science and misinformation and all the rest of it. And so it doesn't help our cause if you're having arguments. We need to get these legislators on our side to at least abstain from the vote. So you need to be friends with them. Hard. The only person that I would say don't be friends with, or you're not going to be able to be friends with, is Senator Pan and possibly Senator Wiener. But for the rest of them, there is a chance that you have that dialogue. Now, it may be further down the road, once you've had the dialogue, once you've become friends with them, that you can share some of that data and they would be open to hearing it. But it's not the first thing that we would recommend you go in with. If California no longer has a Democrat governor and a Democrat legislative majority in 2023, what would happen to these bills? So these bills are going through in 2022. So in order to get rid of them, they would have to have legislation that reverses them. So what you have to realize is there is no way California is not going to have a Democrat governor and a Democrat legislative majority. It just isn't going to happen. There is no way in California that that can happen, because 70% of people voting in California are registered Democrats. You are not going to get 20% of them to not vote Democrat. Now, from a governor perspective, is there a chance that Governor Newsom is not elected, but another Democrat is elected? Yes, possibly. But we're not going to get a Republican governor. It's just not going to happen. There are just too many Democrats in the state. As for a Democrat legislature, that also is the case, because of the way California votes. So probably 10, 15 years ago, California passed an initiative that, and this was voted on by the voters, that we were no longer going to have a top two party system, but we were going to have a top two people system. What that means is prior to that, and in most other states, the way the races happen is that you go through the primaries and the top two parties, the top two people from the top two parties are the people that go into the general election. Even if there was, a Democrat, and a Republican, it used to be that the Democrat would go against the Republican. So you would have at least a chance of another party winning that. 10 to 15 years ago, there was an initiative that changed that it's the top two people. And so now it is the top two people in the primary that move to the general election, even if they're of the same party. So many of our elections in California, I would say most of our elections in California are on the legislative body, on the Assembly and the Senate, are Democrats against Democrats. They are not Democrats against a different party. And so getting rid of that majority is just not going to happen because of that election process. We need to change that election process back to the top two parties rather than the top two people if we want to change the makeup of the legislature. Okay, is there a platform in which citizens' rights as guaranteed by our Constitution are considered by the legislature? None of these bills are consider violation of individual rights. So what's really interesting here is we used to think that, yes, in 277, we came and we said, this is unconstitutional. It's an unconstitutional bill on so many issues. The legislature basically said, and the governor at that time, Governor Brown, said, if it's unconstitutional, then when it passes, it'll go to court and you can win it there and you can win it back there. And so that's basically what we tried to do. And the courts didn't want to hear our side of the story. I will say a win on that side was last year, there was a bill, SB 742, which was Senator Pan's bill, which said that you couldn't protest at vaccination sites. That was taken to court earlier this year and was won in court. And so that no longer holds as a bill, as a statute, sorry, as part of our law. And so there are wins on the vaccine issue, but they're far and few between, especially in California. Our legal system in California is as corrupt as our legislative system, or as biased as our legislative system. Okay. Would schools like South Sutter and Ocean Grove, where parents are considered the teachers, fall into SB 871? So they would if they currently feel that they fall into SB 277. So some of the homeschooling, these are schools that are homeschooling schools that are public schools that get public funding. And the question there is some of them do and some of them don't feel that they fall into it. It's a gray area right now. And so it really depends on the charter school and the homeschool and the way that they have it set up. Some of them say that if your students come in on campus, so some of these schools have like labs and field trips and things like that, you come in one day a week, that they do fall into that, but others don't. Okay. Thoughts on SB 871 being amended to go into effect fall of 2023 instead of January? It seems insane for it to go into effect for school children in the middle of the school year when families might leave the state to pull kids from school. I think this is a good point. The key piece there is I think it will be interesting to see whether CDPH puts their version of this into effect for this school year. So the governor has said that he is going to instruct CDPH, California Department of Public Health, to require the vaccine once it gets approved, fully approved for the different age groups. So when it's fully approved for 12 to 17-year-olds, CDPH will put it into effect for the 12 to 17-year-olds, 7th grade and above. And once it gets approved for 5 to 11-year-olds, fully FDA approved. Right now it's emergency use authorization, fully FDA approved for 5 to 11-year-olds. He will put it into effect for kindergarten and above. If CDPH puts that into effect, I think it will go into effect in July or September for all school kids. If they put that into effect, parents will still be able to have a personal belief exemption. Those parents will sign the personal belief exemption. The schools will now have a full count of who has a personal belief exemption and how many children are not vaccinated. That being the case, they will see whether it makes sense for them to push this through or not in January 2023. For example, if only 5% of school children are not vaccinated come September of this year, let's say for teens, I think they will push it through for January, because basically they're saying, okay, we will lose those 5%. If it's more than 5%, and I'm making it up arbitrary number, but if it's a lot more kids, if it's 20%, which is currently what it is for teens, then the schools have an issue and they can't work out, they need to work out what to do with these children halfway through the school year. In that case, I think it would be pushed to the new school year. So there is a chance that it will be pushed to July 2023 or fall 2023, but I wouldn't count on it, is the thing. I mean, we won't know that unless we see it in amendments. Is it an amendment that I think is possible? I do think it is an amendment that is possible. Okay, we are considering moving, but that almost seems like only a short-term help, as I am concerned with this government overreach will spread, especially considering the World Economic Forum. Your thoughts? I do think that is the case. But I don't. So I do think there is a larger objective. I think it depends on what state you move to. So are there states that are going to follow suit? Yes, there are states that are going to follow suit. Would I move to New York? Would I move anywhere in the Northeast? Absolutely not. Would I move to Washington State? Would I move to Oregon? Absolutely not. Would I move to some of the red states like Texas and Florida and South Dakota and North Dakota? Do I think they are going to implement these? Absolutely not. So I think there are safe states, but I also, from my personal perspective, I don't want to move to a state that is completely red, that is the polar opposite of California. Like, my biggest issue is having legislatures that are completely one-sided and can basically do whatever they want. They do whatever they want. Now, that looks very good in places like Florida right now, where they're saying, 5 to 11-year-olds shouldn't get, or any child shouldn't get the COVID vaccine if they're healthy. Fabulous. That sounds great. But then you also have places like Texas that, the abortion rights and other issues that you may not be for. And so, and they can go to an extreme from a conservative side of things. So, to me, finding a state that has more of a purple and has that middle ground is more important, and where, if I were to move, is where I would move to, because they're more likely to not get legislation passed, which is a good thing in my opinion, than other states. You also have to look you have to look where it makes sense for you. So things like climate also make a difference to some people. Do you think that if California politicians' extremes overreach on COVID could create blowback on SB 277 and 276, as in more and more Californians finally wake up, or is this wishful thinking? So I do think more people are waking up. We definitely have had a growth in numbers of people that are aware of issues with vaccines. I will say, unfortunately, many of the people that have been fighting this since 2015 have left our state and have gotten fed up and have moved. And so we have lost a large chunk of people, but we've also been invigorated with a new chunk of people. Now, many of the parents that are against the COVID vaccine have fully vaccinated their children. Do I think some of those parents will wake up to, oh, maybe we should have asked questions about vaccinations prior to this? I do. But I almost think it's too little too late, because you have to remember that the majority of vaccines are given to children before they're 5 years old, before they come into school. So there are some parents that will be having children, second children, third children, etc., that may wake up. But I do think that there are more people awake about the vaccine issue and understand the progression of vaccines, how they're created, how they're made, how they're manufactured, the safety and efficacy, the FDA approval process, that type of thing. But I also think there are a huge number of people that are still asleep. Like, I truly think we're growing in numbers, but we're nowhere close to, the majority of people understanding the vaccine issue on a greater level, on a deeper level. Okay, if there is a large election upset next November, could the new legislators repeal or revoke these unjust bills if they pass? They could, but they have to go through the full legislative process. So they need to have a majority repealing them or revoking them. Could it happen? It could happen. Do I think it's likely to happen? I really don't know, especially if our governor is the same governor. If our governor stays the same, I'm not sure that he will, want that to happen because he signed them into law. Any suggestions for how to approach staff and if there's an assembly member that actually wrote or co-sponsored one of these bad bills? Our assembly person is Evan Lowe. Yes, I think so. I think listen is the answer I have for you. Have an appointment, work out what your key issue with this bill is. You're not going to be able to go in there with 15 different amendments that you want, but what is the key issue with the bill that you have? And ask questions and listen to what they say. One of the key pieces with having meetings with legislators that are authors of the bill is to understand where they're coming from and where their weak points are. And very often the staff will give that, will share some of that information and the nuggets. So on his bill is AB 2098, which is the physician misinformation. So for example, on that bill, I would recommend you ask him about what is considered standard of care? How is scientific consensus defined? What does that exactly mean? And how do we measure that for COVID? He also co-authored, I believe, some of the other vaccine bills. So I believe he's a co-author on 871 and 866. I may be wrong. You want to check that before you go meet with him and work out exactly which ones he did co-author. But on those, I would also bring up questions for him, just questions of curiosity, of don't exactly understand, could you explain, those types of questions, and listen to the answers, because while you may not be able to convince them to change their perspective or even get amendments, you want to go in with amendments, but you may not be able to change their perspective. It may give us information that we can use with other legislators who could then go and talk to those bill authors and make a difference there. Okay, next question. People who receive SSDI, Social Security for Disability, do you think they will require the shots, or do they realize those people are likely so ill that that it would basically be a large die-off or worse disability? So are leaving these people alone for now. So currently, the way it's written is any employee or independent contractor, and I believe SSDI is considered an independent contractor, but I'm not 100% sure, so don't quote me on that. But I do believe that it would include those people. It may not, but right now I think it's very gray as to what it does actually include and what it doesn't include. My experience with speaking to public officials is that if they hear that I support some bills positions they have, that they don't take very seriously the positions bills that I oppose. Maybe they figured that they've already have my vote as an individual. It seems to matter if I present myself as part of a larger member organization, especially if I show up for their meetings. Thanks for your consideration. So yes and no. So I do think you need to come in there with something positive to say. If you don't want to bring in bills that you want to say, if you've had that experience, you need to read your legislator and their staff. If you've had that experience, I would at least come in some way praising the legislator for something they've done or for something they stand for, so that you have some rapport and you're not just coming in there opposing bills and complaining and wanting them to oppose bills that they really don't want to oppose or that they don't even want to have a conversation about. So if you're not, our perspective is bring a bill in that you're positive towards, so that you can start that conversation on a positive note. If you don't want to do it with a bill, then find something else you can come in with a positive note, because you want to become their friend, so to speak. You want them to be able to have another meeting with you and that type of thing. I agree with you that if you say you are part of a larger organization, that it sometimes floats better than if you're there as an individual. But realistically, what really counts is that you are their constituent and that you are voting in the next election, which is this November. And therefore that you want to, and you can't speak elections when you're speaking bills. So you cannot talk about elections in their district office. You have to be in their campaign office or outside of their district office or their Sacramento office if you want to talk elections with them. So just be clear about that. You cannot talk about your vote or elections. You can't say, but you can say that, I am your constituent. I'm an active constituent in your district. I, take my vote very seriously. And I really, like what you have been doing, if you do like what they've been doing on X, Y, and Z issue, But I really have an issue on this. And I feel that in our district, when I talk to parents, when I talk to other people in our district, and this has to be true, but when I talk to other people, that they also have concerns in this area. And I'd like to talk to you about them, that type of thing. Okay, if the vaccines for kids never get authorization, will SB 871 still be effective? So if they currently have authorization, I think you mean even approval. If they don't get FDA approval, the current way the bill is written is that they still would go into effect. So it doesn't say they have to be FDA approved. It just says vaccines for COVID-19. Now, if it had that in the language and said that they have to be FDA approved and they never get approved, then yes. Having said that, I just don't see them not getting approved for children. I don't see the Pfizer vaccine not getting approved for at least teens. Should we be asking WIC's bill RE employees to be referred to several committees as we did with 871? If so, which committees? You can, but I don't think that it'll go beyond business and professions, because that's really the committee that it needs to go to. It doesn't have, referring it to multiple committees. It needs to be, it may go to the Judiciary Committee because it does have that. So it may go to 2 committees. We have not put a call to action out on that front because we really want to see the opposition from big employer organizations or unions, those types of things, before we do this. Our perspective is if they are putting up a huge front, then what we ask for matters less. And so we are waiting, and I think in the next few days, we will see letters come out. We saw a letter of concern from the Chamber of Commerce come out today, and we do believe that other organizations will be will be putting forward letters of opposition with requested amendments. And we're pretty sure they're having conversation with WIC's office right now to discuss amendments. And so it really, that will determine which committees it goes to, because we don't have any idea what amendments those organizations are requesting. It makes it harder to know which committees would be appropriate for it. But most likely it will be sent for sure to the Business and Professions Committee, and most likely, I'm guessing, it will be sent to the Judiciary Committee. What is the process to gain full approval for a bill, e.g. committee approves, but the legislature vote is less than 50%, is the bill killed? If the legislature vote is greater than 50%, does it go to the governor? Can he veto it? So yes, if you want more information on this, I did a video probably 2 months ago now. It's on our YouTube channel. Our handle on YouTube is A Voice for Choice, and I would go watch that. It's I think it's called How to Lobby Your Legislature, and I go through the whole timeline on there. There's also a 2-hour presentation from the Convention on Health Rights video that all of our organizations got together and put together, and my section in that, I also go through the legislative process. But just quickly, a bill gets introduced, it gets referred to committees. In the committee, it has to have a 50% vote, 50% plus 1 vote to get through. If it dies its death. It's no longer can be brought back. If it moves on, it may go to a second committee. Same thing applies there. If it gets through that committee with a 50% plus vote, it then goes to the Appropriations Committee if it has a fiscal impact. If it has a fiscal impact, then it sits in the Appropriations Committee until they vote it out of the Appropriations Committee. It then goes to the floor of that legislative body. So for example, if a bill starts in the Senate, if it's introduced by a senator, it'll do all of this in the Senate. It then goes to a floor vote on the Senate floor, and it then switches over to the other side, to the Assembly, and it goes through the same process. It gets assigned to a committee or committees, gets voted on there, goes to the Appropriations Committee. If it has a fiscal impact, it then goes to the Assembly floor or the opposite house's floor. And then if it passes that with a 50+1 vote, it then goes to the governor. And the governor can either sign it or veto it. If he doesn't sign it, it by default goes into law. So he needs to veto it in order for it not to go into law. And yes, he can veto it. He vetoes probably about 1/3 of the bills that come to his desk every year. Of the 3,000 bills, about 1,500 bills go to his desk every year. So you can see that there is drop off, and he can veto it. If he vetoes it, it can go back to the legislature, and they can, if they vote on it by a 2/3 vote, it will become law. Very few bills get vetoed and then reinstated by the legislature, because the legislature doesn't want to go against the governor. And it's also hard to get a 2/3 vote. It's hard to get the majority, the supermajority, to vote on it all. Okay, what if you're an MD who is awake, but you're afraid of retribution if you speak out? Can you go on a meeting and just give a first name, for instance? Good question. And the answer is yes, I completely understand. I do think you can give a first name. I think you can probably, you have to use an email address. So, in order probably to make that appointment, or if you get an appointment via phone, then you probably just have, they have your phone number, so to speak. But I think you can go in. I wouldn't be concerned about retribution from I'm going to say regular legislature. So if they're part of the vaccine work group, then maybe I would be more concerned. But if it's just a regular legislator, I wouldn't be too concerned about it, that you're going to be put on a hit list if you're just going to meet with legislators. I do encourage you to go meet with legislators, because you are the one that is going to make the difference. I will say, remember, and this applies to everyone, come at it that you're speaking to the person that you're speaking to. So if you're speaking to a Democrat, you need to use Democrat language. You need to recognize that they are fully for this vaccine, that they were afraid of COVID, that they had COVID protocols, they were for masking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They were for lockdowns. So you need to go in and talk to them on that level. You also need to talk to them in their language. So using words like equity, social justice, diversity, inclusion, those types of words are Democrat words, and they are what they hear. So if you use words like parental rights, or I'm trying to think of other ones that are more conservative, religious, and we do encourage you talking about religion and religious equity from the perspective of a Democrat, but religious rights and religious beliefs are more conservative. So you want to be talking to your legislature. The Republicans want smaller government. The Democrats want bigger government, those types of things. So do go in talking to them, because if you talk their language, they're more likely to hear you. And some people say to a Voice for Choice Advocacy, wow, you sound so Democrat and so progressive in your speaking. We do it on purpose, because that's who the majority is. That's who we have to convince. If you're not talking their language, it is hard for them to hear you. It really, truly is hard for them to hear you. Would a handwritten letter be better than an email? I do think they open mail more and are likely to read it more. Just make sure that your writing is legible and that they can actually read what you're saying. But I do think a handwritten letter is a good approach. It makes it different. It stands out from just the millions of emails. How can we find out what data is in the California Immunization Registry on ourselves and our children? You can actually go onto the California Immunization Registry website, and you can submit your name, and I think you have to submit your birthday, maybe a little bit more information, but you can put it in there and download what is in there for you and your children. Did SCOTUS determine worker vaccine mandates for private companies unconstitutional? If so, is that a question for our legislators? So you're right, the Supreme Court struck down the federal requirement for vaccine mandates for employees. However, that was not because it was unconstitutional from the perspective of it cannot be required on a state level. So the federal government does not have jurisdiction over vaccines. OSHA does not have the jurisdiction over requiring vaccines of employees. And so what the court found was that OSHA could not apply regulations stating that the vaccine was required for private and public employees. And that was unconstitutional. However, the state government, state legislature does have jurisdiction over state laws requiring vaccines. And so that's why California could require this, but the federal government and OSHA could not require it. So it is not unconstitutional, maybe unconstitutional for other reasons, but it is not unconstitutional for a state legislature to require COVID or any other vaccine. Okay, explain the difference of submitting to the legislative advocacy portal and just emailing representatives. So if you email your representative, it's going to their inbox. The legislative advocacy portal is for committees and for the author to know how much support or opposition there is. So when the bills go to a committee, let's take the health committee, right? So when the bill goes to the health committee, before the committee votes on it, before the committee meets, the committee staffer will write a legislative analysis, which goes through existing legislation or as existing statute, other bills that have been brought forward in the past that relate to that. And then it goes through all of the information that they have received in support of the bill and in opposition of the bill. And it will then list the number of people and organizations supporting the bill and the number of people and organizations opposing the bill. In order to be counted in that, so that's the record for that bill. In order to be counted in that, you have to put your opposition or your support into the legislative advocacy portal. Emailing your legislator gets you a count as a constituent that you're opposed or supporting a bill. And so that counts because you as a constituent are important to your legislator, and they are supposed to want to represent their constituency. And so that's the importance of that. So it's important to do both things. Again, I don't particularly care for emailing legislators, your own constituent. If you're a constituent, your own legislator, I would recommend calling and setting up an appointment and meeting with them. But if you do email them, it just goes to them. If you email a legislator that is not your legislature, you just as an individual, if you email some other legislature, they won't count you if you're not a constituent. They may count you if they are on a committee and you're sending it to that committee, the legislators on that committee, but they won't, even then, it's their constituents that they really want to hear from. What about natural immunity? Can there be a push to recognize this if you have documented proof? I definitely think that is one thing that we are asking for these COVID vaccine mandates, is that natural immunity be recognized. Unfortunately, the United States has not recognized natural immunity ever at all during this COVID crisis. And so, much of Europe has had either 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year. Different countries have different requirements or different options for natural immunity, but most European countries have recognized that there is natural immunity. It's insane that natural immunity has not been counted. We have never gone through a disease where natural immunity has not counted for a period of time. The question is, what should that period of time be? But we have never been in this situation where natural immunity doesn't count for anything. And so a Voice for Choice Advocacy is pushing for that. But unfortunately, until again, it comes down to the CDC, the FDA, until the CDC, FDA makes that statement, it is really hard for us and for California, to take a lead on that, because they want to have the backing of some governmental scientific body. Since all legislators are probably bored, could we crowdsource and buy them back? Interesting question. And the answer is yes, but you'd need millions of dollars, literally millions of dollars. But does it work? Yes, it does. I think you'd be better off. So the key place where you can do that is in elections. I think it is very hard to do when you're up against, for example, the CMA, the California Medical Association, the CTA, the California Teachers Association, who are, spend literally millions and millions of dollars. The prison guards are another one that spend millions of dollars. So next question. Can we overturn the 12+-year-olds for the HPV and hepatitis B shots? I think it's very hard, as I mentioned, it's very hard to overthrow legislation. You need to the legislature needs to be behind it. And I just don't see the Democrat legislature removing that and moving forward. If they're anything, they're moving in the other direction. Okay. Does my letter of opposition need to be unique, or can I send it in one that somebody else wrote? So for the advocacy portal, You just need to say that you oppose, and you can just put literally a line saying, I oppose SB 871, let's say. You don't have to go into explanation why if you're doing it as an individual. If you're doing it as an organization, it's better if you write why you're opposing it, but you actually don't have to either. So, I wouldn't necessarily use what somebody else wrote. I would tweak it a little bit to make it personalized so that they don't think you're just copying and pasting something, but you don't actually have to write anything more than I oppose blank, blank, blank bill. My senator is not accepting my request to have a meeting. What next? I would request a meeting with a staffer. If your senator or your assembly member isn't offering meetings, try and get a staff member to have a meeting with you. If that fails, go to one of their public events, but they should be meeting with constituents on these issues. It's what they're hired to do, what they're paid to do. So is there any way to find others from our respective areas to coordinate meetings with legislators? Yes, that is where the Take Action town halls come into play. And I would go to those. Some of them have already happened. There are some areas where they're not necessarily happening. If you are in an area, the other thing that I would do is join Stand Up California. So if you go to standupcalifornia.com, you can join your county area, and it's an email list, and you can join that, and then you can email other people in your county and ask them if they would be willing to go to the district meetings with you. Next question, can you go to meetings that are outside your district? You can, and I would recommend it if you are going with somebody else that is a constituent, or for example, if you have a business in that area, or you have your kids go to school in that area. You do need to have some claim to that legislator. You have less if you are not a constituent because they care about the votes. But yes, you can. I, for example, have a business in one area, and my daughter goes to school in another area, and I live in another area. And so I encompass all three of those and just say that, I have kids in school, or have a business in their district. Is there a leave behind for the legislature, and how do we communicate our meeting feedback to your lobbyists? Wonderful question. So there is a leave behind. I would recommend leaving behind our 2-pager, which says the good bills and the bad bills, so that they have documentation of what you want them to oppose and to support. There are also fact sheets, as I mentioned, on SB 866 and 871 that we're going to send out that you can leave with them. Each of those are 2 pages each as well. And then how do you give feedback for our lobbyists? So we are working on putting together a survey, sort of a post-legislature survey for people, just short and sweet and to the point, so people can communicate what the response was from the legislature and that type of thing. So we're in the process of putting that together with other organizations, and all of us are going to send that out to have people fill in. So I'm hoping that by the end of this week, we will have that in place so that people can put in their feedback, because that is really important to us. If not, feel free to just send me an email, Christina at Voice for Choice, just with your information if you don't see that, or you want to do it separately, and it is helpful for us. Should we ask for an amendment that is not only fully approved for children, but that is fully approved vaccine that is readily available? So we are not asking for any amendments that go into what the actual vaccine criteria are, because we don't really want them to be included. We don't want the children to be required. We would much prefer a religious and conscientious belief exemption to be included that allows parents to opt out for those reasons, rather than any sort of intricacies on what the vaccine has to be in order to be allowed. Because ultimately, in a year, it may not be approved right now, but in a year, 2 years, 3 years time, there's going to be a whole load of vaccines on the market that get included. Per your comment, if the percentage of children not vaxxed stays above 5%, which seems very likely, how will California truly enforce this? It is a really good question. I think it's going to be interesting to see how some schools there are school districts where this isn't going to be an issue, like the Bay Area. The majority of kids are vaccinated in the Bay Area. But in Northern California and even some of the Central Valley, there are a lot of children who will not be in school. And so I think it's going to be a real issue. The question becomes then is, are they going to spend money on virtual academies and put these kids into independent study and online learning? I think that is a huge undertaking for California. And so I think it will be really interesting to see, especially in the Education Committee, what happens and how these children are going to be accommodated, because I don't think that they can be accommodated right now. Somebody said it may be helpful to put together a sample script for calling to ask for an appointment with your rep, as you guys do with your calling to express concerns on the bill. It's not hard. Like, it's just calling up and saying, hi, I'm Christina Hildebrand. I am a constituent. I live in Mountain View, and I would really like to have an appointment to meet with Assembly Member Berman. And then they'll probably say, oh, well, he is not taking appointments right now, or we get the next appointment that we have is, in April or May. And then you say, well, is there a staffer that I could talk to about my concerns with some of the bills that are being put forward? And then they should say, well, yes, so-and-so is available. It's not a hard, it's not a hard conversation to have. The key is that you don't hang up until you have a meeting and you're persistent about it. Don't be rude, be professional, but, try and get a meeting. And if it doesn't work that time, then, try calling back or emailing, or, they may say, we don't have any appointments right now. The next appointment is, in whenever. And then I would say, could I have that person's email address, and can I write them my concerns? And then the email address that you get with that staffer is key, because that's a person that you're emailing. It's not their general sort of contact information that goes into a huge email box. Okay, I think those are all the questions. I know I didn't answer some of them, but I think most of them I answered because they were, many of them I didn't answer because they were duplicative, but I am going to stop there. I appreciate you all being on. I will say, I know one question that gets asked and get asked tonight, but I'm going to say it anyway. People ask, how can we help? I would say the biggest piece is to take action. So I'm just going to put this last screen that I shared. These are the action steps you can take. Take one of these, take all of these, do as many of them as possible. I would say the most important thing right now is meeting with your representatives and also putting a letter of opposition or support for each of those bills into the legislative advocacy portal. The other things on here are all really important as well, but they are probably secondary to those two things. The people that wanted to know of people that are in your area, I would go to Instagram, the Freedom Keepers, and just go to one of the Take Action town halls that they're having. Even if you missed them, get in touch with them, and they will put you in touch with the local people that showed up for that. And then, as I said, religious leaders, school boards, Chamber of Commerce, other parents and leaders, talking to people, getting people aware of this legislation. But the one thing that people ask me is, if I can't do that, or even if I can do that, what can we do to help a Voice for Choice advocacy? We have hired 5 directors this year. We need to pay them. And so donations, and we have 2 lobbyists. So donations to a Voice for Choice advocacy, if you go to avoiceforchoiceadvocacy.org, there is a donate button on the top, or you can do /donate. Any donation, large or small, is appreciated. And that is actually what will help us immensely during this year to keep going what we've got going. So, and to help you and to help our state hopefully kill some of these bills and at least get some amendments to these bills. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful evening. And if you have any other questions, I will do another one of these, not necessarily on legislation, but on other issues in the coming weeks. All right, thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.